Sí.
Let me try this one. Let me know if you can see my presentation.
Yes, perfect.
Yes.
Yay, got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, then
Okay.
with that, I can start with a bit
Perfect.
of small delay.
Okay. Yes, go right ahead. Thank you. We're starting the timer now.
Okay. My work is going to be about network-based routing in rough and smooth terrain. This presentation covers only a small part of a larger dissertation research, and the aim of this research is to justify the use of anaerobic digestion, which can be used for agricultural areas. It requires hauling of waste to target location, and it generates biogas from solid waste. The effluent is one of the byproducts of the procedure that can be transported back to the farms as fertilizer. And some of the problems that this technology is facing is transportation measurements and transportation metrics. Taking the biogas to the target location, in this case it's going to be our power plant, and taking the farm waste to the digester, and finally taking effluent back to the farms. Dijkstra's algorithm is being used throughout in order to measure shortest paths and shortest path solution in smooth terrain, but what really happens in rough terrain is the question that we're asking in this presentation. A few words about anaerobic digestion. The whole process initializes when organic waste is being brought into the digester tank over here, and you have those three byproducts that you can see here: CO2, biogas, and digester effluent. The biogas is being burned in the location of the power plant, and heat and electricity is being produced, and the digested and effluent can be used as fertilizer that has to be driven back to the farms. Going over Dijkstra's algorithm really fast, Dijkstra gives a shortest path solution on vector networks. It computes the distance between all adjacent nodes of a network and stores that info to a distance matrix. It essentially visits all the nodes in a network, and with backtracking, you can find the shortest path between a starting point and a target location. Now, talking about the surface-adjusted distance, the difference between a regular planar Euclidean distance and surface-adjusted distance is the difference of assuming that the pixels on a digital elevation model that you can see here in picture A, that the pixels are flat. But when in reality, if the elevation is included in the distance calculations, the metrics differ a lot. And this is what I'm going to show on the later slide. And over here, you can see this paradigm of a car going uphill or down a hill, and how the distance between A and C are different if you include elevation in it. Going over the actual routes that have been chosen to be showcased here, this is the case study area. If someone is not familiar with it, this is Boulder County in Colorado, which is very mountainous. The west side is very mountainous and the east side is very flat. That's the reason why you see those three routes and how they differ. Those three routes have a starting point of a farm, and they drive all the way down to the power plant. The intersections that you can see here are just junctions of the road network that Dijkstra is traversing in order to find the shortest path from target location to destination point. You can see that in the smooth terrain, which is the orange line over here, the difference between Euclidean distance and surface adjusted distance is not that very big. It's only 0.001 kilometers. But if we go up to the mountains, and there are several farms up to the mountains that have to drive all the way to the power plant, this is the surface adjusted distance, and this is how it differs from Euclidean distance. You can see discrepancies of 6 kilometers or even 8 kilometers. Between Euclidean and surface adjusted. So moving on to the future research of this part is that we are going to try to incorporate national land cover dataset in order to filter our roads between commercial roads and roads that we want to take, or the roads that we do not want to take, for example, from downtown areas or park and recreation areas. We would like to apply weight edges on our roads so that there is a higher possibility to select roads that are major highways or arterials, and a lesser possibility of selecting residential roads to traverse through. And we would also like to consider different speed limits for the roads that we have, and maybe incorporate state level data so that we can again filter the roads accordingly, and assign speed arbitrarily in NLCD land use classes. And with that, I would like to thank you for attending my presentation, and finish up with some of the reference that were used for this presentation itself. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We have 2 minutes and 10 seconds for questions. So if there's any questions, please enter it into the chat now for Georgios. Georgios, I'll tell you something while we're waiting, and there could be someone furiously typing right now. I'll tell you something. So I'm really interested in your work, but I have made it a point across the 2 lightning talk sessions not to ask any questions, because I also have a student who's presenting. So after this is over and the lightning session is completely done, I may contact you to ask some questions about you.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I work in network analysis as well. So
I see.
But
That's great.
I have to be completely impartial and don't want to even ask any questions.
Yeah, I get it.
This forum. So, okay, well, we've still got about 1 minute and 20 seconds, but, so here's a question. I'm sorry, it came up here. It says, hi, great talk. Is your method transferable for any other areas?
Yes, I have been using open source data throughout. My road network is open source. Everything I'm using is open source, so I can replicate the same study in different counties and in different study areas.
And another question came up. Are there other algorithms besides Dijkstra that you considered?
So far, I have only used, again, open source Dijkstra based on Stack Overflow and anywhere else that I have been able to find information about Dijkstra. So other than Dijkstra and the surface adjusted Dijkstra, I haven't used something else for the route purposes, like route selecting. Of course, whatever I'm using is cross-checked and cross-validated with already methods that are being used from ArcMap, and I'm pretty sure QGIS has their own method of traversing the road network and so on.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. We're just about out of time.
Thank you.
So
let me stop sharing.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thank you. We have our next presenter, Shrabona. Welcome to the stage. We will ask you to come up and share your screen.
Hi, can you guys hear me? I just want to open audio.
Yes.
Wonderful. So just sharing my screen right now. Here we go. Okay, can you see this? Okay.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Okay, go right ahead.
Thank you. So thank you for having me, and thank you for the last 2 days. It has been incredibly an incredible learning experience. So my title has changed slightly. In the title below, it is called Spatial Inequalities. Here I call it an equity lens. Before I go ahead, I want to quickly acknowledge Dr. Hamel-Pearsall, Dr. Gutierrez, as well as Dr. Gilbert from Center for Sustainable Communities at Temple University, where this research was developed. And also I want to do a quick line acknowledgement to Lenni Lenape peoples and Ho-Chunk peoples for their land contribution. So real quickly, this research is based on the premise that communities of color have been disproportionately exposed to infrastructure development, and there is a lot of work looking at various infrastructures and how they have negatively exposed minorities and communities of color using by the virtue of their location, basically. And there's also a set of research needs that we identify, which is not a lot has been done in terms of quantifying how different infrastructure systems work together or against each other to benefit or burden communities. And furthermore, at regional levels, not a lot of work is there that looks at region beyond urban and other or urban and rural, so breaking that duality. There is, however, some prior work where imperviousness has been used as a measurable way of looking at the urban-rural as a gradient, and that too has been found to have some local relationships with socioeconomic characteristics. So here in this research, we examine what are the different dimensions of inequity that we can explore spatially, and how can we explore the local relationships, and how can we examine the role of proximity and access to inequities. Our study area is the 9-county Delaware Valley region, which is spread across Pennsylvania and New Jersey. As you might already know, this region is one of the poorest centers, metropolitan centers in the country, and is also has been found to have persistent environmental inequities. This is coming from a lot of qualitative work by Diana Sicotte. So quickly going through the methods, because that's the boring part. I begin with the data compilation at tract levels from various open data repositories at federal level and the state level repositories. And eventually we identified, going through the process again and again, we identified 4 dimensions of inequity, which is race, education and attainment, well-being through access to private and state-sponsored health insurance, and income. And we also chose independent variables which had strong correlation with these dimensions and low multicollinearity amongst themselves. So eventually we landed up with regional transportation infrastructure, travel behavior, access to green spaces, access to hospitals and clinics through health infrastructure, and what kind of food deserts exist in our study area. So from this, we developed 3 models. The base model, which regresses against the imperviousness there in literature, and a set of infrastructure model, which is the global model and a local model through GWR. Finally, for communication, we chose the models which has the highest explanatory power and least errors. So I want to go through 2 results. Of course, it's a work in under review right now, so hopefully we can learn more through that. The first one I want to say is when comparing imperviousness and infrastructure at a global level, we found that the models performed in at a similar scale. However, when we break it down to individual variables, we do see that different infrastructure variables, notably state and interstate highways, play a significant role in explaining where communities of low health access are, or communities of minority populations are in the study area. And we also see that local roads do not have a lot of influence in both the models. So one of our findings is that perhaps infrastructure which services the larger region is a disseminity to local disadvantaged neighborhoods that needs to be looked at more carefully. The second thing we see through the local infrastructure models is that these models do show a high level of clustering, as we can see in the maps over here. But they also do not show a lot of explanation. They do not have a lot of explanatory powers in the urban centers. I'm pointing my cursor at Philadelphia, then there's Trenton and Camden over here. It does work, however, seems to have a higher explanatory power right outside the cities. So it also differs from the layer of imperviousness which we're using as the base model. Furthermore, what we also understood as we go through this is that imperviousness does not govern non-gray infrastructure such as green infrastructure and blue infrastructure, where green infrastructure has been found to be quite significant in our study. So we also argue that perhaps we need to think about region in different ways. Some concepts have been put out there, such as mosaic and network. Quickly wrapping up my presentation with some limitations, we need more research on infrastructure systems and how they work together with in a varying degrees of urbanization. I also want to point out we have not considered all forms of infrastructure and hope to refine this model by building on them. We are missing energy, waste systems. The quality of a green infrastructure was something we did not quite consider in the study. We also did not consider social infrastructure like institutions and city centers. Finally, this analysis is a snapshot, but there is a documented history of systemic racism, especially in our study area. So perhaps a longitudinal research can show some persistence, or a historical GIS study can show what is it can shed some more light on the intertwinedness. And that's it.
Bona, that's great. Thank you very much. The time is up. The 7 minutes is up.
Oh,
So thank you very much. We're going to move to our next speaker. And again, you can engage in the chat with folks if you would like to.
Thanks so much. I'll leave now.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next, we'll welcome to the stage Thomas McKeon, also from Temple University. The 7 minutes goes by fast. Welcome, Thomas.
Hi, everyone. I'm just sharing my screen, and everyone should be able to hear me and see this. Is that right?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
So
go right ahead. Yes, thanks.
great. So first, thank you for the introduction. I'd like to first thank the conference organizers for organizing this event and providing this opportunity for us to share our work. My name is Tom McKeown, and I'm a PhD student in the Department of Geography and Urban Studies at Temple University. In this presentation, I will share the outcomes of a mobile public health intervention that utilized a novel GIS investigation to consider the effects of environmental factors on treatment outcomes. So mobile health has expanded in recent years within the digital health sector. These interventions provide healthcare support via mobile technologies such as smartphones, tablets, and wearable smart devices. Although these mobile public health interventions provide real-time support, current studies using mobile interventions have not adequately considered environmental factors. The use of GIS can expand our understanding of how place characteristics can influence intervention outcomes. So we incorporated GIS in this mobile intervention to better understand how contextual differences in place, such as the home or frequented locations outside of the home, may sway intervention outcomes in this pilot study. So this analysis uses data from a pilot randomized controlled trial of an intervention aiming to reduce the risk of substance use among adolescents. 69 adolescents were recruited from a health center in a mid-sized southeast U.S. city. Half of the participants, 34, received a text message intervention that was oriented around peer and place-based behavioral mechanisms. And the other half served as a control and did not receive this text message intervention. The intervention focused on psychosomatic risk factors, such as depressive symptoms. So home and activity space location data for all participants were collected over a period of 3 months. Participants reported their activity places using Google Maps and completed behavioral health surveys at baseline, 1, 2, and 3 months post-enrollment. Previous research using neighborhood disadvantage has found an association with neighborhood disadvantage and negative health outcomes, such as substance use, stress, and lowered perceived safety. For this study, neighborhood disadvantage is represented as an index of U.S. Census data factoring in census tract level variables. These variables include percentage of households with income below the poverty line, percentage of female-headed households with children, percentage of adults with a bachelor's degree or higher, and a percentage of owner-occupied housing units. For this study, GIS was used to calculate average disadvantage values, which are generated from a 1 mile as the crow flies Euclidean distance around each home and activity space location. Disadvantage was dichotomized into high and low groupings on the threshold of negative and positive neighborhood disadvantage values. So our study had 2 hypotheses. First, we hypothesized that depression will decrease over time in the treatment group relative to the control group. And the second, that the suppressive effect of the treatment on depression will be moderated by disadvantage, where the treatment effect will be stronger for subjects living in more disadvantaged neighborhoods. An empty random intercept model indicated that 67% of variability in depression score could be accounted for by the individual. So after fitting the predictor variables of time and intervention status, the average depression score decreased significantly in the treatment group. Neighborhood disadvantage around the home moderated the treatment effect. So depression scores decreased significantly in the treatment group with higher disadvantage, even after adjusting for individual level socioeconomic status. Moderation effects by disadvantage were not observed using the activity space. So both hypotheses were supported, We speculate that this may be because the psychological stress associated with exposure to neighborhood disadvantage confers the higher sensitivity to contextual effects via reduced executive function, as prior research suggests. So those that were living in more disadvantaged areas were more receptible to an intervention status. So this research found that for this sample, that the text-based intervention was stronger for youth living in more disadvantaged home environments. And this highlights the need for more GIS in mobile public health interventions to better understand underlying factors of neighborhood effects. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for listening. I'll take any questions.
Thank you. So we have almost a full 2 minutes for questions. Any questions, please type them into the chat.
I realize my screen is still sharing, but I think I exited out of my PowerPoint, but I can pull it up if anyone has a question about that.
So a question I think has come in here. It is great work. I'm curious how the participants were recruited.
Sure, yes. So the participants were recruited from a health center in a mid-sized city in Tennessee. The GIS analysis was done after the fact. So this was a study that it was a pilot study. It was a randomized controlled trial. So all these participants were seeking support for substance use, and we're interested in seeing whether or not a text intervention would have an effect on the participants, and they're all adolescents. And then the second question is, do you have any issues with your IRB? So, again, this is a secondary analysis of data that was separate. So the participants were studied for a separate study, and so they're all anonymous. I didn't have to go through the IRB process to do the GIS analysis of this.
Okay, there's just about 30 seconds left if there's any questions.
Thank you, Thomas.
All right, great.
Thank you for listening.
Okay, great. And Molly, you're next up. If you could, perfect, jump into the stage. Welcome.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
All right, let's share this. One moment, please. Here we go. And let me just expand that. All right.
Okay, great. Go right ahead.
All right, principles for humanitarian GIS science. So I explore the intersection of geography, forensic anthropology, and geographic information science, specifically in applied humanitarian research. So what I've noticed as I've studied these things is that geographers tend to focus on human rights moderating techniques, monitoring, and then anthropologists, they focus on finding and identifying human remains. So I take these convergent interests, these two disciplines, to establish humanitarian GIS, which I define, as you can see, humanitarian forensic action that leverages geospatial technologies and methods, as well as geographical theorization of space and place. And humanitarian forensic action, I have taken that definition from the International Red Cross, which is forensic science conducted to alleviate human suffering post-conflict, post-disaster. So the principles that I've put into this developing toolkit emphasizes place and the integration of qualitative data into geospatial technologies following critical geographers, feminist geographers, and others. And this shift is so important because frequently it's memory recall, it's testimonies, it's affected surviving communities that really initiate and propel forensic investigations forward, especially in post-conflict scenarios. research, I study migrant death at the U.S. border, specifically Texas. In Texas, there's effectively a documentation vacuum where medical and legal authorities' efforts to find and investigate and identify the migrant dead is confounded by a lack of resources, time, and training. So I look to see if I can bridge some of these gaps and improve and increase identification outcomes with qualitative and geographic geospatial techniques. So I'm sharing some of the early results from part of my dissertation research, and one technique I'm using is qualitative spatial representation, QSR. I collected media releases from U.S. Border Patrol's public affairs website. Between 2015 and 18, only 44 articles actually explicitly mention migrant death. And using region connection calculus, a language to state spatial relationships between entities, especially when the placial description is vague, this breaks it down in a semantic triple, so you can trace these relationships in space. And this table represents that organization, which enables me to create this kind of dynamic map. So what this has told me, just based on the Border Patrol data that I have, Border Patrol collaborates with a local sheriff. They go to a site where a set of remains have been discovered. In Texas, typically if it's a migrant, it's in the Rio Grande River. Jurisdiction goes over to the Justice of the Peace, and further examinations and hopefully identification then happens at the county morgue. Let's see, another technique I am applying to this Humanitarian GIS toolkit is corpus linguistics natural language processing. And I'm going to be a little quick here, but basically CLNLP are computational methods to analyze large bodies of text. So what I did here is I took text from Border Patrol's Twitter, South Texas, where migrant death is particularly high, and I calculated co-occurrence of terms, that is, correlations between terms of interest, migrant death, and every other word in this particular corpus. And what I found is that migrants are usually discussed in terms of illegal crossing, illegal aliens, if you pardon my language, and actually discussion of confiscation of drugs, as opposed to conversations around search, rescue, or recovery of deceased. All right, so what is this all about? First and foremost, QSR, CLNLP have not been used before in an applied forensic humanitarian research context. So what I hope to accomplish with humanitarian GI science, in particular with these programmatic qualitative methods, is to enable researchers to trace, map, and relate connections and meanings that are not readily mapped in Cartesian coordinate space, sort of a traditional GIS. And this can be very powerful because these are empirical means to disparate documentary sources, which is very typical in Texas. But it also has the potential to include myriad perspectives. So yes, I used freely available data from Border Patrol, but this can also include perspectives from humanitarian groups, affected families who are searching for a missing migrant relative. And then bigger picture, these same techniques could be applied to other fatal migration corridors, such as the Mediterranean and what have you. And in other related research fields, these same techniques might be useful in historical GIS research, particularly in genocide studies. So thank you all very much. Organizers, everyone, my advisors, I'm ready for questions.
Thank you, and we have just over a minute for questions. Please type them in the chat if you have questions. I see there's a lot of activity in the chat, which is great.
Let's see.
Here we go. So how are you identifying relevant articles?
Relative articles. So with
Relevant
articles. So I've been looking at local newspapers to try and get a physically located news source on the border, looking at social media for actors who are working on migrant deaths, so to speak. So that's why I use Border Patrol, because they do end up being involved in migrant death in various ways, but also medical examiners, forensic anthropologists, and humanitarian groups, anyone who is involved in some part of the process of investigating these deaths.
Okay, thank you. Our timer is up. There is another question in the chat for you, and you're free to respond. In fact, there may be a couple questions there for you, so please go ahead and respond. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great. And we have next up Ashley Price from the University of Alabama. Ashley, please feel free to jump in onto the stage and prepare to share your screen. Perfect.
So Ashley, it looked like you were coming in there, and then we don't see you.
There
you go. All right.
All right. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Okay. Can y'all see that?
Yes,
we sure can.
All right.
Okay, go right ahead.
Yeah. So thanks, everyone. I'm Ashley Price, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Alabama, and I'm presenting on spatial optimization for interdiction resource policy. So the background is that every year over 1,200 metric tons of cocaine are trafficked from South American production nations through the Central American Transit Zone and into the United States and the global market. So bulk primary shipments of cocaine leave in air and maritime shipments before
Ashley,
they land.
I'm sorry, I'm unable to hear Ashley. Suzanne, are you able to hear Ashley?
Yes, I'm able to hear you.
Okay, I think it must be me. I'm sorry. Please go right ahead.
That's okay. So bulk or primary cocaine shipments arrive in Central American nations via air or maritime routes, where they're usually broken up into smaller or secondary cocaine shipments for distribution over overland routes. So over time, we see these illicit networks displaying the balloon and cockroach effects, because not only is the geographic area of illicit activity expanding, but the volume and frequency of individual trafficking events is increasing. So U.S. involvement in the transit zone is led by GIS South, and they're responsible for detection and monitoring of illicit activity in the Eastern Pacific, the Caribbean, and the Gulf of Mexico, so an area of about 7 million square miles. GIS South doesn't actually do interdiction per se, but they forward intelligence to the relevant law enforcement agency. So, for example, an individual interdiction operation that's called a force package to intercept a go-fast boat in the Caribbean would involve dispatching a tactical squad from a helicopter or a boat from a Coast Guard cutter. So it's not surprising that interdiction is becoming more costly, but at the same time, there's a relative decrease in effectiveness. And as is, less than 5% of known trafficking events in the transit zone are intercepted. So in conversations with GIS South, we know that the extent of illicit trafficking far exceeds interdiction capacity, and the interdiction assets are severely limited. So this is a classic location allocation problem. But organizations like GIS South don't use interdiction models from the spatial optimization literature because they don't meet the constraints or the objectives for interdiction operations. So how can we improve interdiction modeling in a way that influences counter-drug policy and practice? And we can start by asking, how does asset availability influence interdiction success? So in the sample modeling scenario here, the data looks like this. There are 156 known trafficking locations throughout Central America. Those are nodes. And each node has an attribute for the amount of cocaine that's present at that location, but also an attribute for the type of force packages that can locate there. So, for example, a cutter in the Caribbean or the Pacific could intercept a shipment along their respective coast, but also law enforcement within the partner nation could intercept there as well. And the multiple type maximal covering model, it's written up like a classic covering model, right? We want to maximize coverage or maximize the amount of cocaine seized, but with the additional capability of being able to accommodate these force package type constraints. And we can also, the results are pretty straightforward, right? When we target the most lucrative shipments, we improve coverage or improve seizures over the 5% rate. But more importantly, it shows that we can build interdiction models that can accommodate not just personnel and equipment constraints, but we can also look at jurisdictional issues or even targeting specific DTOs. So the next step then is to implement these interdiction models in dynamic scenarios that capture the way drug traffickers respond to interdiction. Because we know a lot about where drug trafficking happens, but we know less about how the deterrent effects of interdiction influence the timing of and the spaces where that drug trafficking happens. And I need to finish up here, but going forward, the future research question is looking at the behavioral responses by drug traffickers. And this is part of a larger work that's funded by the NSF. And we're doing this with an integrated, so we're integrating the spatial optimization models with an agent-based model of trafficker behavior. And that involves working more closely with Diana South, the Directorate for Technology and Innovation, and learning more about how to accurately model the operational environment where interdiction happens. Because if we are successful in modeling traffickers' behavior in response to interdiction, that knowledge can ultimately lead to can ultimately influence policy and practice, not just in day-to-day operations over choosing the best strategy, but over the medium term with asset allocation or resource justification. But more importantly, and finally, over the long term, that we can demonstrate the effectiveness of interdiction, we can assess the reduction in collateral effects, which will not ultimately inform interdiction practice, but could inform interdiction policy and ultimately improve public safety and security. So thanks. I think I almost ran out of time.
Okay,
No, you're fine.
Actually, will you nod yes or no if you can hear me right now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, you can hear me. I cannot hear anyone, in a bit of irony. You have 1 minute and 19 seconds left to answer any questions. So folks, please type any questions into the chat.
Kevin, in the
And since I can't hear anyone, including Suzanne, I did try to change some settings, but nothing seemed to change it. So I'm going to try to do this without sound for the last two. Instead, I'm afraid if I try to jump out and jump back in, I may mess things up. So any questions for Ashley in the last few 45 seconds or so that we have?
And I've been refraining from asking questions as well.
Suzanne, I'm going to let you
as a moderator.
Take charge here.
Okay, well, excellent presentation. Thank you, Ashley. Oh, there is a question. Any similar work that may indicate traffickers' response?
So we know, like I said, we know less about the deterrent effects of interdiction, and we don't actually have unclassified data about individual trafficking events or the location of specific traffickers or specific drug trafficking organizations tied to those events.
Okay. And then Mark has asked location allocation algorithm. What, I'm assuming, Mark, if that was for Ashley.
So I think the question may be asking specifically about how we solve the models, and they're written up as a linear program. So they're written up as a linear program in Python, and I solve them in a Jupyter Notebook in ArcGIS Pro using the Heroku Py module.
Okay.
Our time is up.
Well, our time is up. So thank you, Ashley, and thank you to
all
of the students who are presenting here. We have 2 more presenters. So if I may call to the stage, Mihak. Here you are. I don't want to mispronounce your name, so I'll let you introduce yourself. Why scale matters, Simpson's paradox, and local modeling.
Great. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. Okay.
And Ashley, you may want to hit the leave button in the upper right-hand corner.
We have limitations on how many videos we can have, but we're okay. Welcome.
And by the way, my sound is back mysteriously now, so I'm sorry.
Awesome.
Great.
Is my presentation visible, and can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I'll start. Good morning. My name is Mehek Sachdeva, and I will be presenting an exploration on the modifiable aerial unit problem, commonly abbreviated as MOP, using local spatial models. In the era of global models, a question of scale almost exclusively arises in the context of the data used to calibrate the models. So the classic MOP approach would explore the MOP with a focus on data would typically be conducted as follows. We would calibrate a global model using the most spatially disaggregated data available, aggregate the data in different ways, calibrate the same global model using the aggregated data, and compare the results of these models, all calibrated with the entire available data set. The claim in this presentation is that in the era of local models, the question of scale should now be refocused on processes. So do the processes we are modeling operate at a local or global scale? To what extent do the results of calibrating local versus global models lead to different inferences? Specifically, what do we do if the results of calibrating the same model locally and globally produce contrasting inferences? For example, the Simpson's paradox. I will talk more about the last question today to keep it short. So the approach I propose here to explore MOP with processes at the forefront is as follows. We calibrate a global model using the most spatially disaggregated data available. We calibrate a local model for each location then, and compare the results with local models calibrated using differently aggregated data. So I will now present a short example from the housing market to illustrate such a situation. The data used here are house sales prices for about 20,000 houses in King County in Washington State, which includes the city of Seattle. Covariates such as square footage of living area, access to waterfront, access to jobs, and other such were used to explain the variation in house prices. The models are calibrated using MGWR, a local modeling approach, and OLS, a popular global modeling approach. We will focus on the effect of one covariate in particular, that of the effect of age of a housing unit on house prices. So in the global model applied to all points, the estimate of this parameter is 0.01, suggesting that across this region, older houses are worth more than newer houses, assuming all other covariates to be constant. This suggests that house prices rise by about 0.1% for every 10% increase in the age of the housing units. Although the effect is not huge, it will still be reported as statistically significant. However, when we look at the model calibrated locally for each origin as shown on the left, most local estimates are significantly negative, suggesting that as the age of a house increases, the value declines by an average of about 6% for every decade. This is classic Simpson's paradox. The results of calibrating the same model at one spatial scale contradict those obtained at a different spatial scale. To explore this further, we examine at what scale the inference changes by calibrating local model for 11 different scales of aggregated data, mapping only the significant parameter estimates. The spatial scale at which the significant local relationship between house price and age switches from being primarily negative to positive occurs when the data are aggregated to about units of 1 kilometer square. At finer spatial scales, the significant local estimates are primarily negative, and at coarser spatial scales, the significant local estimates are primarily positive. The change in the condition relationship between the age of a unit and its value can also be seen here by plotting the regression line for the original data and the 11 sets of aggregated data. So each line here represents the trend of the condition change in house prices with respect to the age of a housing unit at different grid aggregations. The trends change from being significantly negative, the gray line in the plot, to significantly positive as the data are increasingly aggregated, the violet line in the plot. So this is confusing, right? Which of these maps should we believe then, and what interpretations can we draw from this? It really comes down to the question that you want to ask. So when all the data are analyzed in a global model, the parameter estimates are based on a comparison of house sales across the whole of King County. And at this scale, areas with older houses, such as in parts of Seattle, are more desirable than other areas containing newer houses. Older areas of housing may be seen as more stable, and or having a cachet associated with age. So this generates the significant positive relationship seen in the global models and in the local models using highly aggregated data. However, at the local scale, the model parameter estimates are not based on a comparison of house prices across the whole county, but only within local neighborhoods around each property, and where presumably the age of properties is more uniform. At this scale, within neighborhoods of similar housing, newer houses are worth more than older ones, leading to locally significant negative relationships. So the refocus on processes and away from data in terms of both the MOP and Simpson's paradox allows us to reach the following conclusions. Spatial research has an inherent scale which must be addressed in this choice of model, results, and interpretation. Local and global models often answer different questions about spatial phenomena. Global parameter estimates inform on the condition relationship between Y and X across the whole study area, whereas local parameter estimates inform on the same condition relationship but around a single location. The parameters estimated in the calibration of global models are not necessarily averages of their equivalent local estimates. In some instances, a spatial variant of Simpson's paradox, as seen here, can arise, whereby a relationship is significantly positive at the global level but negative at the local level. And finally, local modeling and the focus on processes creating the data we observe can help explore statistical biases commonly observed, such as MOP and Simpson's paradox. Thank you, and I will take questions now.
Thank you. Excellent.
Yes, we have just under 1 minute for questions.
So we have a question from Mark. So in this example, which scale is best? Which would you recommend, for example, if shopping for a home?
That's exactly the point, that if you're looking for houses compared to houses in the neighborhood, then you would be looking at a local model because that provides more information on a unit, on a single unit. But if you are wanting to make policy decisions at the census tract level, then you are going to be doing an analysis at that and taking care and into consideration that the ecological fallacy doesn't fall into place, that you're actually making assumptions at the census tract level but are commenting and interpreting at the individual level. So that's the important takeaway from here.
And just a few seconds left. The question is local model MGWR at small area disaggregation, or is it completely separate OLS or MGWR within a small area? Again, very briefly because our time's up.
So MGWR is basically just OLS in a certain subset of data. So we are using local neighbors to calibrate the OLS for each location. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. And there's some more questions in the chat. We'll invite our last speaker today, Ye Tian from the University of Georgia, to please join the stage. And feel free to continue the discussion in the chat.
Okay,
Welcome.
hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Okay, let me share my screen. Oh, what's this button? Okay, can everyone see my presentation now?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay, thank you everyone. And I'm Ye Tian, and I come from the Department of Geography at the University of Georgia, advised by Dr. Xiaobai Yao, and I'm also affiliate researcher at the Sensible City Lab at MIT. So today my presentation is about the spatial temporal pattern of outdoor exercise exposure to PM 2.5 and the relationships with urban form. So my research background can be summarized that the increasing urban population has led to higher level of harmful total emission and deteriorated air quality. As a result, my research tries to understand how could urban form improve or degrade the air quality, and what are the potential effects on the human exposure. So in this study, I use a crowdsourced data called Strava, which is an online social network app. It could track the users. GPS tracks during their exercise. So, which is very popular all over the world. And I also extracted the corridors, which are the most popular roads that exercise are using in Atlanta City.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but your slides are not advancing, so you may not be in presentation mode. Can you switch your PowerPoint to presentation mode?
Is this in the presentation mode?
I don't think so, but we are seeing a different slide now.
Oh, sorry.
We just need to make sure that the slide that you want to be showing is up at the time you're talking.
We see the third slide now.
We see the third slide.
Okay, yeah.
So maybe you want to click through on the left panel.
Click through on the left panel. Let me check. Sorry about.
Kevin, you can pause the timing. We're on your third slide. If you want to just present, okay.
Let me just.
So there may be a button, yes, in the lower right. I think you were over it a moment ago. That is the presentation mode.
Is this in presentation mode now?
No. If you move down in your lower right, there's a button.
Yeah, I click it, but I don't know why.
Click that one.
Yeah, in my computer, it is already the presentation mode.
It may be the screen you selected to share when you joined the stage.
Oh, okay.
So it's okay.
It's share the whole screen, not the application window.
Possibly.
Possibly. Sorry, everybody, but we'll get this going. There were different options to share.
Is that okay now?
There we go.
Yes,
yeah,
okay,
sorry
about the time.
Perfect.
Okay, let's continue. So I extracted all the corridors in Atlanta City, which are the most popular roads that exercises are using. And this is my research design. For the first part, I extracted the air core data from the EPA station and tested with a portable sensor called AirBeam2, and other trip information included as a dependent variable. And the other independent variable included the urban form matrix, which was calculated from the land use data, and other control variables like the population density, household income, DEM, and other socioeconomic variables. And finally, we incorporate all the variables into the random forest model and compare the results between two groups of model. One is use a wind-related buffer radius, and the other is use a predefined buffer radius. And I will explain here. So usually in previous studies, many researchers calculated the urban form within a predefined concentric buffer radius such as 50 meters or 100 meters, that sort of stuff. But in this study, we considered the meteorological factors, especially the wind speed information, into our research. For example, the buffer radius is not only decided by the wind speed, but also decided by the time that each exercisers are spent on this corridor. So we call it wind-related urban form. And this is a result of the spatial distribution of the trip information from the Strava. And it could be divided into different subgroups, such as trip for commute, for layer, or for different genders and age groups. And for almost all groups, we can say a high trip count in the northern Atlanta city, and there are larger trip count. And this is a temporal change for the different trip information. And I want to mention that there is a gap between the January and February for almost all groups, possibly due to the low air temperature, and most exercise are not willing to go out. So this is a temporal change. And the July 4th, it's a very important festival, and people go out to celebrate it. So it have a higher trip count. And this is a correlation results from different group, use a wind-related group and the predefined buffer distance group. So we can see that for most subgroups, that is a wind-related group model outperforms the other groups. Except for the senior groups, it didn't have obvious advantages, and I will explain later. So the reason is possibly could be attributed to the feature importance. We can see the distance to the gas station, the distance to the industry or temperature has larger feature importance than other urban form factors. Especially for the senior groups, it has much larger feature importance. So people consider the environment comfort or safety factors more than the urban form factors, especially for the senior groups. That's why the wind-related group may not have shown obvious advantages. So finally, I want to show some environmental inequality issue in Atlanta City. We can see in northern part, it has lower PM2.5 and also lower asthma rates. And we can see there's a positive trend between the PM2.5 and annual and the asthma rates visits. So there exists some environmental inequality issue. And according to previous findings, what we find is that many people willing to take exercise in the northern Atlanta. So there are many sweet spots in the northern Atlanta. Sweet spots means there are larger trip count but lower air pollution. So that's a very good sign. So for the major findings, firstly, we need to state that the meteorological factors is very important for us to understand the urban form human exposure relationship. And the exercise considers the convenience, safety, and the comfort factors more instead of the urban form factors. And finally, the environmental inequality issues exist due to the higher levels of PM2.5 and asthma rates in the southern Atlanta issue. So this work has been submitted to the journal Transaction GIS. And finally, we'll come to have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
We have about 45 seconds for questions. The question came in, how to access the Strava data?
Okay, that's a very good question. I contacted their agent in the UK, and I said I need to access your Strava database, and they agreed to give me 1 year access to the Atlanta region for the academic purpose, not for the business purpose. So you could directly send an email to the Strava agent. Yeah, I guess they will support you. Thank you.
Okay, there's just a couple of seconds left, but yes, the time is running out just now. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
And we would like to thank all of the students in this session, as well as across the other Lightning Talk sessions, for offering up an opportunity for us to view your work and use this as an opportunity to disseminate the results of your research. It's really a wonderful symposium to do so, and we appreciate the time and effort that it took to do this. So thank you for that. And thank you to the judges for your time and providing input for the students. We do have extra time in this session. Sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just was concurring with you. I just want to say, everyone, thank you very much. I really actually enjoyed this part of the symposium quite a lot. I really like seeing this work. So thanks to everyone.
And we had scheduled and we did a great job of scheduling. Here's Diana. We'll give you the stage now.
Thank you again, Suzanne and Kevin, for the fantastic moderating of this session. To all of the students, that was great. I know that I think in this session, they were all under review for potential student awards. So judges have been watching, and thank you so much for all of that. We're going to have the information in the next few days. We're not going to be able to, we won't be announcing the results before the end of the symposium about these awards. So our next session is coming up. I don't think it's at the top of the hour. I think it might be, I've lost track myself. Just one quick second. Let me consult my own calendar after 3 days of planning things. Actually, it is at the top of the hour. So in 15 minutes, at the top of the hour, we begin our penultimate content session, an ethics, a panel on GIS science and ethics. So hope everyone gets a chance to go take a break and join us again for that panel. And then after that, we're going to have our very exciting council meeting, which I encourage all of you to attend. And then an extended happy hour after that. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you later.
Thank you. Thank you, Diana. Thanks, Kevin.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.